So it's my pleasure to introduce our third panel of the day, which is a panel about sustainability. The topic is research on climate change mitigation, on adaptation, and on the transition to net zero that has been transformed by the growing availability of very large data sets. It's about how data science can unlock these new data sources to provide unprecedented insights in the behavior of individuals, households, and firms that are facing the climate challenge. So in this final panel of the day, we're going to explore how contemporary data science is instrumental in achieving sustainability goals. The session is chaired by LSE's own Aurelien Saussay from the Grantham Research Institute for Climate Change and the Environment. And our panelists include Michal Nachmany, the CEO of the Climate Policy Radar and a visiting fellow at the Grantham Institute, Milliotte, who is the Global Sustainability Lead at Ekimetrics. The panel will be 45 minutes long and will include a question and answer session. We will then have a 25-minute break before our keynote speech and the drinks reception. Without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Aurelien. There you go.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you everyone for staying for this last, but hopefully not least, of the panels on sustainability and AI. And we're very, very delighted indeed to have both of you on this panel to tackle two very complementary angles of this question of how AI can contribute to fulfilling our sustainability and climate goals. With Caroline, we'd like to first explore how AI can help businesses in the real world actually improve their efficiency, their sustainability, both through improved data collection and through improved analysis of that data. And then with Michal, we'll explore how modern AI techniques, particularly NLP, can help us understand better climate policies, which can sometimes be a bit obscure to both practitioners and those that have to implement them, and also how it can help us design better policies moving forward. So please, Caroline.
Yes. So should I maybe say a few words about Ekimetrics to start with and introduce myself? If that makes sense?
Absolutely.
All right. So Ekimetrics is a data science company. We are 400 people around the world. Our headquarters are in Paris, but we do have a UK-based office as well, where I am actually from. We are a purpose-driven company now. So really, we've made it a commitment as a company to drive transformation for our clients. And so that's why I'm here today, I guess, to see how this really translates, concretely speaking, in terms of the projects we are doing with them and how we did this transformation, the environmental transformation, but not only. We had a very nice panel on responsible AI earlier. That's also part of it. And so to go back on your first point, I guess what you wanted me to talk about was really like what sort of data we're dealing with and what do we do with it. So really, I think the metrics that we're looking at to improve thanks to AI is really the collection, as you mentioned, of all these like ubiquitous sources of data. It's very complex. Even myself, as the sustainability lead in Ekimetrics, I'm struggling, and we are actually developing tools for our clients that I'm beta testing first, trying to make sure like I get all these different formats, structured, unstructured data, and how we build data lakes to make sure we can interrogate this properly and fill, of course, questionnaires, RFPs, and all the not more systematically and more consistently. Again, the sources of data is very wide. It's not just carbon data. We are also talking about everything related to biodiversity, water, pollution, deforestation. So it's very large. Where we struggle today, where we see some struggles and where we think we can really help with AI, is really on carbon data, specifically on the scope 3, of course, which is not directly in the hands of the businesses most of the time. So, it's everything upward and downward, their value chain, really. And specifically when the suppliers they're working with are small. How do you get this data? They don't publish reports. It's not publicly available. So how do you guess where you can try to minimize the environmental impact? Was there anything else I wanted to add on this one? No, really small businesses is a key, and scope 3 in particular.
Amazing, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a bit of a general theme of this session, that like one of the main contributions that AI does today to the kind of work we do on sustainability research is providing us with better estimates of the data we do not have, but still we do need to understand how carbon footprints or sustainability metrics evolve over time. And Michal, if you would like to add a few words on
Sure.
how that materializes for climate policy.
I want to do a couple of things before that. This is an interactive session. From the level of your desk, I know nothing about climate, to here, I know everything there is to know about climate. Can you give me an indication of where you are?
It's quite
All right.
Good.
All right. All right. So maybe, thank you for that. Thank you for playing along. Maybe 2 sentences first about AI and climate. And I'm using climate instead of sustainability because a little bit everything is climate. Everything that we do, how we eat, produce, consume, move around, behave, incentivize behavior, is relevant to climate change, either impacts climate change or is deeply impacted by climate change. And AI, which is a tool, and technologies are neutral, and the question is how do you use them? Today is used in a variety of ways to tackle climate change. I'll talk a little bit about what we do, but I want to paint a slightly broader picture to start with. AI today is used to bring together lots of data and analyze it fast. What does that mean? It means monitoring. It means looking at observations. Those could be satellite images, those could be emissions, carbon and methane. They could be land changes. They could be all of those observations and monitoring of activities that we need to look at. They could be developing new materials that are more energy efficient. They could be optimization, for example, of electric grids and the ability to do the same thing with less energy, for example, or to calculate more optimized transportation routes, so the drivers bringing things to us do it with using less fuel. They can also do things like model and predict. So predictions of weather or extreme weather events, for example, is a critical thing. You kind of want to know if a storm is going to hit you tomorrow, and who should we issue the evacuation order to if an extreme weather event is heading our way, or what schools should we close on time, or what kind of food planning should we make, or what kind of health planning should we make with infectious diseases that are relevant to climate change, that are connected to climate change. So AI, as a catch-all phrase, helps us do all of these things better, faster, deeper, and also reveal some kind of unpredicted or previously inaccessible things. In order to do all of those things, we need the data, we need it to be available, and we need it to be accessible to those who make those decisions. Available, sometimes not all of the data sets are available, and you can imagine that, having satellites in the sky and having broadband to access are two different sides of that, and we're far from ideal in that, but we're making kind of good progress towards in both of those. Still very, very far from where we need to be. All of those metrics, all of those things are needed to make great decisions, so we can make it better, right? We're not on a great trajectory as humanity. We need to make it better. What does that look like? It looks like better policy decisions. And it looks like moving money around from where it often is, so from old polluting industries to new, exciting, efficient, clean industries, moving money around to adaptation to climate change, moving money around, of course, to loss and damage, to pay for the, damages that communities, for example, coastal communities are suffering because of the results of already here climate change, like rising sea levels. So all of these decisions need to be evidence-based. So it's great that we're monitoring some stuff, but somebody needs to put it to use. Somebody needs to say, okay, I need to write a policy that actually does X or Y, or I need to move the money from here to there. What do I need? So we also need to monitor what people are doing. So we need to monitor the laws, the policies, the corporate policies, the strategies, the commitments that countries are submitting to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, in which they say this is what we plan to do by the end of the decade, by the end of the century. And those policies and documents and action plans are very long, messy PDFs often, that are written in very technical language or in very kind of policies. Not everyone speaks policies. In lots of languages, so from Romanian to Mongolian, to English to French to Portuguese to through everything else, on multiple websites. And if we don't have if we don't have the access and the ability to look at those data and to ask, okay, who's done it already? What works? What can we replicate? What do we need to avoid? Then we won't have the ability to move forward. So this is what Climate Policy Radar does. We are a not-for-profit AI company. Climate AI, we never know how to describe ourselves. We're kind of working on it because we're sitting in that weird intersection between being very deeply embedded in the climate community and talking to all of those people who are making those decisions, policymakers, investors, bankers, financial institutions, journalists, research institutions, academics, who are needing to make those decisions, and finding the right documents to read and the right way to read them. So extracting the structured data from them. So we're building a big knowledge graph that extracts those structures. Instead of control find renewables, you can now find them using large language models that are tailored to what that means. What does renewables mean? And we're starting to play with generative AI to synthesize and make that data more useful. Because reading lots of long documents, as many of you know, as many of you are probably in academia and read papers, is a long and taxing task. And when we don't have time and we don't have money and we're racing against the clock, we need to scale back on that. So we end up making decisions that are not optimally informed. So being able to make sense of that and to synthesize things quickly, again, using the emerging incredible technologies and dangerous in parentheses, so we need to look out for that, is another thing that we do. I gave a very long monologue. I think I'll pause here.
It was wonderful. it was perfect. And it's actually, I mean, all three of us use NLP techniques to put structure, as you said, on unstructured information about climate policies, about climate information. And there was a really good discussion, super interesting, in the health space about how reliability is paramount in that instance. And I guess, like, how do you see like improvements of reliability, and how do you ensure it, particularly for the more subtle aspects of climate policy? When we think about like targets, it's easier probably to like have a better extraction of what the emissions reduction targets are by this or that date. But when you think about, for example, the more social aspects of climate policy, like ensuring a just transition so that the distributive impacts of climate policy are not too negative, those are very subtle concepts that are hard to really parse in automated ways. So what are your vision on that?
Sure. So I think there's a few ways that we can think about the difficulty there, and you've already highlighted a few. So one of them, this needs to be tailored to the question that we're asking. It's like I said, control find renewables doesn't work. Control find just transition definitely doesn't work. Because just transition means consulting with the worker unions to see that the people who formerly worked in coal mines and now are going to be out of a job because thankfully we're closing down the coal mines, that we're not messing up their communities and their livelihoods. How do we transition them, and how do we kind of ensure that that is done smoothly? How do we ensure that we don't put on the price of new technologies on the consumers, for example? So these are some really thorny elements that for us who know what the just transition is like, yeah, of course. But you can't control find that. So developing a classifier for that requires a really strong collaboration between the domain experts and the people who are building those tools. And I think that when you go to generic tools or to generic LLMs, large language models that are not tailored and are not trained on the very specific domain knowledge, you might encounter problems. So doing so in a like hand in hand, we talk ourselves about augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, like a human-centered approach. I'm not saying anything new to any of you, I imagine, but like putting humans at the center of the design and the review and the iterations, that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, we want reliability. So we want to avoid hallucinations, which is a problem that everyone is tackling now. and we're part of a Gen AI accelerator that about 20 organizations at the forefront of this work are working, and everyone is solving the same problems. No one has we're writing the playbook together as we're going along with that. And we find that one of the ways to deal with that is humility and signaling. Humility is saying, we don't know yet. We may not have the answer yet. Please be, so a combination, right? This may be wrong, please check it. Also, here's a footnote. Here's the text from the original document, so the provenance of this, that says this is the source to our answer. Can you please check it? Can you, by the way, give us a thumbs up if this served your needs, or a thumbs down if it didn't, and using those in order to refine and fine-tune the models so they can do that. So there's a real kind of deep circular thing, but the humility has to be at the center of it, and not to pretend that we're doing things that we still cannot. And finally, there's the very critical element of bias. Whatever you feed the model, it spits out. So if you only feed it English language documents that are written in the West, then you're only going to train the model on that. But if we want to train the model, especially with climate policy that is global, different governments talk differently about things. In Japan, they still call it the Global Warming Act. So if I only search for climate change, I may ignore that. Of course, this problem exacerbates when you think about languages that are not well represented in training sets, concepts that are not well represented in training sets, and so on. Acknowledging that, being aware of that, actively calling and bringing in for the reduction of bias in these training sets will allow us to do a better work. And that has to be also a result of active engagement with stakeholders in underrepresented communities, areas of expertise, and so on. Yeah.
Caroline, does that fit with your experience?
That rings a bell. You know, we've developed a tool called Climate Q&A that does kind of the same thing. So not on policies, but really just swallowing all the IPBES and IPCC reports that are also very lengthy and difficult to understand for anyone else from except the expert that have written those texts. So to make those available to the public, and actually the language, when you were mentioning this knowledge has to spread around. You know, they publish the reports in a few languages that are French, English, whatever, maybe Portuguese, maybe Romanian, but certainly not the very small ethnicities that are not represented on those published reports. And so it was important, I think, to bring this tool to be able to answer questions for those communities that may not have access directly to reports in their language. So very similarly to what you're doing, we're doing this as well, purely on climate, citing our sources. So I think I fully agree. We're super aligned on this, and I think we should talk more because there is a lot of knowledge sharing we can do on this one, for sure.
Well, thanks. I mean, before we open the floor to questions, maybe taking a bit of a step back from what AI can bring to sustainability question, which I think we all agree is a lot. There's also a rising tide of criticism about the environmental impacts of increased use of data collection, of data science, of AI, particularly the latest generation of Gen AI models that, as we know, are more computing resource intensive than their predecessors. So what are your views on that? Do you think it's overstated, maybe a bit of a misconception that those types of computing uses are very resource intensive?
Maybe I can start from an example from Ekimetrics, that is a data company. This is what we do every day. And actually, if we look at our carbon footprint, the use of the cloud and all this data, the storage, the push, the modeling and everything, it's less than 7% of our entire carbon footprint. So it doesn't mean it doesn't count. I just mean, it's good to put things in perspective. And yeah, some of these models may be expensive. But again, I think it depends how you use them, for what purpose. At Eki, we are super aware of this. We've developed a zillion little tools that are able to calculate the carbon footprint of everything we do. So we monitor very carefully, and that's why I'm able to tell you this is less than 7%, because we're actually monitoring this for 2 years in a row now, and we're actually doing this for our clients as well. And of course, with Gen AI, some of the costs are rising and some of the carbon costs are actually hidden and we have to guess them. So there might be some uncertainty on this, but I don't think, like, we're not generating the model on which we are then calling and querying about. So every one of those queries does have a cost, but it's a small cost. It's a small fraction of the cost. So really, if the application is about making sure that the companies we're working for and with are on the decarbonization target, and it's like millions of tons down the road, I think there is no comparison. It has a cost, but it's very small.
So it's still better to write your notes on your iPhone than on a piece of paper, probably.
No, it's because I have no paper with me today.
I would like to add a couple of things to that. I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge that it's a huge problem. And we can't ignore that. Last week I was in a two-a-day conference at Columbia University. Yes, I flew there, I'm sorry. And it was on AI for climate and nature. And every presenter decided to use, or not every presenter, but several people who presented created a wonderful kind of a Gen AI generated image that says, oh, I was just, I put in the title of my presentation into DALL-E or into whatever, and here's what it created. And someone yelled from the audience, every image you generate is a bottle of water. I think it's every 3 images, by the way. But I think, first of all, bring this to our awareness and making sure that we act responsibly on this, and that we don't do stuff for fun, but we do stuff for good, and we take this into account. This is critical, because it would be very, very easy to say, oh, we're doing stuff for good, and at the same time we're biting, we're biting ourselves in the heel over that. So acknowledging that, and that there is a genuine impact on that, on labor markets. People who do a lot of data labeling are in the global south. I think Nairobi is the biggest place where cheap human labor is being put to work at, really, of course, the labor is not cheap. The compensation for the labor is very low. That's what I meant. Those are things that we want to avoid. These are things that we want to be equitable, and we want to make sure that our values on why we do things align with how we do things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, let's do it in a way that we constantly optimize. So large language models can optimize themselves. Training costs can go down. All of these things are happening, and if we are able to do that and use those tools in a great way, so we can cut down on our energy costs and on our materials cost, and we can create materials that are more efficient, and we can bring decisions to do that, and we're racing against the clock, that's definitely not a tool that I would rule out. I think, though, we need to make sure that we use it responsibly and constantly acknowledge the price that it has.
Thanks. I think it'd be a great time to open the floor for questions. So the mic will be coming your way.
I'm sorry, I'll ask so many questions this time. Now, in your decision stuff, there's a lot of different methodologies, like I've got option theory, critical path programming, scenario analysis, sequential decision making. So I'm particularly interested in critical path, because that's how you build buildings. You do the shortest, and you talked about there's not much time left. So are you using any of those technologies, like which used to be called operations management or operational research in the old days? I mean, scenario analysis, everybody. I mean, do you have the?
So I want to contextualize climate policy radars part in this ecosystem. Right now, we are not doing any modeling or analysis. There are a lot of organizations that are stellar, that are doing and know how to do that, and it's different for building, and it's different for transportation, and for different industries. What we're providing is the underlying infrastructure of data that allows then to take it and put it into the models. So we specialize in that, and there's a lot of I'm going to use the Lego analysis. There's a lot of Lego bricks that you can that you need to identify to then use and build those different. And then you can take those Lego bricks and build them in a critical path analysis or in a scenario analysis and so on. We're not doing that. Identifying the structured data can feed into that, and working with those who will then model it will allow us to create for them what they will need later. And part of our partners are the wonderful Grantham Institute, and I see Liz in the audience, hello Liz, who are doing a lot of this modeling and thinking, what makes a great climate law? There's an event next week if you haven't signed up to that, and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, in terms of like the data you extract, like we also have some, of course, extraction tools and so forth. But I think so. We have built some modeling and estimation modules that are able to estimate for any given size of a company, any sector, any geography, the decarbonization pathway for this company, and estimate their current carbon emissions, including Scope 3 emissions, and saying what can we do, and say as a consumer, or I mean as a company that buys from those suppliers, what can they do to help them reduce their pathway? So this we have been doing, and we are super conscious when we develop such modeling techniques to minimize the carbon cost. So always. And we don't think that trying to get to some sort of like super accuracy is making any sense in those scenarios, because anyway there is a lot of uncertainty. So for sure we'll try to minimize the carbon cost associated to those.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much for the interesting panel discussion. I'm not sure that this is quite the right place, but I wanted to ask this question to somebody. I think that you are the experts. So there was a paper published in 2020 in Nature Communications that said that AI was going to have a positive impact on 75% of the 169 targets for sustainable development goals, and it was going to have a negative impact on the other 35%. I was wondering, how true is this, and what impact have we seen? It's 4 years since that paper.
Sounds like a Nature Communications article, all right?
Sounds like an Nature Communications article. I don't know how to answer that question, because I think that when we think about technologies and we say, is the impact of technology positive or negative, that's an interesting framing. I don't know, we can use it for good for anything if we use it well. We can, we're talking about the energy efficiency of, or the energy, or the price in energy, materials, labor, water of AI. That could have a negative impact on all of them. Yeah, I'm a little wary of the framing. It's not a very good answer, but I'm a little wary of the framing of something as good or bad. I'm a little wary of the framing of metrics of SDGs as standalone, independent metrics as well, because what's good for water is bad for energy, or what's good for health is bad for climate. Like, those things don't, all of that is such an intertwined ecosystem that if somebody went and had a methodology for counting good and bad, that's fine. Also, since 2020 was the article, so many radical things happened in AI, and specifically with large language models, but not only. I mean, look at the work that DeepMind has been doing around weather predictions and accuracy and wind farm optimization, and look at the work that Open Climate Fix are doing around predicting whether in 5-minute intervals, whether the clouds are going to hover over your solar panels. And therefore, are they going to produce or not? And the radical implications this has for energy grid balancing and monitoring and optimization. Those are things that have skyrocketed in the last 3 years in a way that I think an article that was published in 2020, therefore written in 2018, probably couldn't have predicted how much. So sorry for the authors of that paper for killing it right now.
And I think you actually made a point in your previous answer, talking about people in Namibia labeling some data sets and versus the use of this data. And so I agree that there is a balance, and probably the way to look at this is really so the alignment on the SDGs and the impact a certain AI project could have for a certain company on those. That would be something we could assess, and actually it's a framework, so we can do it with AI. If there are some reports published and some data available, for sure. But I would not be so generalistic in how to approach this. I completely agree with you.
I mean, and just to compliment, especially even if it did help with sustainability goals, depending on the productivity impact or the economic growth impact of AI, if it fosters more economic growth without greening that growth, then it would be very hard to say that it supports sustainable development goals in and of itself, right?
So a question over there as well. Michal, Liz Robinson, Director of Grantham Research Institute. Michal, you raised this, but it's a question to both of you. You said right early on, sort of parenthetically and dangerous. And so I just wondered, we've heard a lot about the difficulties, and we've sort of heard some allusion to this, but I think especially linking back to the early discussions of AI and ethics, what do you think the sort of dangers might be? And even better if you can couch it and link back to sort of some of the ethical concerns there. Thanks.
Sure. Do you want to go or do yeah, please? I think there's like two almost diametrically opposing concerns. One, and they're both around trust. One, that people don't trust it at all, and one that people trust it too much. People trust it too much and it's still not good enough, and end up making bad decisions based on it. And this is where all the risk of hallucination and bias comes in. And we are, and I talked a little bit about how, some of the ways that one might mitigate that. The second one is, of course, that people don't trust it at all and say, ooh, the robots are coming after me and therefore I'm not going to use this, and stay with the status quo of data modeling and decision making, which is not good enough for what we need to be achieving on, on a planetary, to address all the multiple planetary crises, health, biodiversity, climate, poverty, equality, all of those things. So those to me are two of the considerations. When I founded Climate Policy Radar, I was standing at a crossroads because we're building something that is highly commercializable. A lot of companies and investors would gladly buy the data set of like accessible climate policies so they could do better compliance. But I ruled against it and said, actually, we're here to build a public good. And we're building a public good for a number of reasons. One, because usually those who are impacted the most by climate change are the least able to pay for it. So let's give it to them for free. And make sure that they're able to use that and reduce a little bit the aspects of the digital divide. It's not that we're providing broadband to everybody, but we're making things that are available from your browser more accessible, and you don't need like supercomputers in order to model. And we're translating and all of those things. But mainly, we made our data and our models open source. Open data and open source, and the reasoning behind that is saying, here, it's out in the open, come and criticize us, and we're openly inviting that. Come and call us on our biases, come help us make it better, and make sure that we're not subject to the incentives and to the pulls of how much more of this can we sell. And we definitely need a private sector, and we definitely, this is not trashing for-profit companies on that, but when you think about public policies, there's something really precious about the trust that you put in that, and the ability to put it out in the light is a big safeguard against some of those concerns. And finally, the biggest ethical concern is that someone ends up taking these in a very black boxy way to make decisions that you're not sure how they happened, because what we're producing is data. But in order to make a decision, you need the data and you need a normative framework. If we're going to decarbonize, we could decarbonize fast or we can decarbonize equitably, and those are not necessarily the same paths. And if we tangle those two without naming them and without saying, these are my normative considerations and this is my ethical framework for making the decision, but we hide that in a modeling, then that's a risk. Untangling, naming, I think, are some of those ways to address that, making sure that the decision-making is very clearly labeled as a human process that has a clear logic to it, whatever that logic may be. So I'm not saying what that logic should be, I'm not imposing an ethical framework, but I'm wanting the ethics or the ethical or the normative considerations to be named as such that are separate from the data.
If I may add to this, so from a business that a fit for purpose business that is still, going down the ethical path for sure. And now that we are committed as a purpose-driven company, responsible AI is completely part of what we do. We have actually a team of 7 people involved in this. So we talked about how many talents do you need in a company to do this. So over 400, maybe that's not enough, but this is actually good enough. And what they're doing is really providing some best practices, tools, something really concrete, so that on every one of our projects we have those checklists, and we make sure that we check every one of those aspects from responsible AI. I don't know, robustness, whatever, frugality for sure. It's also part of my umbrella, but. I think it has to translate into something that makes sense for everyone and every one of our data scientists that are working on the project, so they are aware. And the biases you mentioned, I mean, this is so super important that we make sure that when we get a data set from a client, it is biased in itself. So what sort of methodologies do you use to unbias this data set? Do you actually want to unbias it or not? Do you add extra data? And those questions have to be answered, and this is what we do on a daily basis. And so from our own experience, then we've developed those standards and the data governance that goes with it, so the responsible data governance, for which we accompany our clients for, Now they're actually happy to pay us to do this. So it's really like there is even a business opportunity out of this. Who would have think about this? But, it's like it was a big investment for us because we knew it was important, and this is also the only way we can make sure that these great tools, we think those are great because they really they have an impact and they make a difference, they are actually being used properly. If you don't explain what this is, the black box issue, I mean, it has no impact and it's useless. So, yeah, very important.
What strikes me in this conversation is that we've spoken a lot about how to get better data to answer sustainability challenges, how to put structure where there's none, how to impute information when we're lacking data, but maybe less so about how the current crop of tools and the tools that are on the horizon can help us design better mitigation or decarbonization strategies for firms or better climate policies for governments. So if you'd have like a few words to say on that line.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I may start because it's going to be a quick one. I mean, the automation of all of this, analysis, digesting all this information, like now it's getting, it's streamlining itself. There is the CSRD regulation, of course, that is a massive, I forgot about regulation earlier, we talked about it. I think it's a great push. Like we see, there is a huge demand from our customers to align themselves on those frameworks. What does it mean? What sort of data do I need to grab? How do I organize this? So it's a data science transformation internally, and it's also how what do you do with this data and how you exploit it. So I think on this one, strong acceleration, automation, it's already happening now. So very quick answer on this one. Then I think there is a big, a low-hanging fruit. It's everything to do with auditability of this data. Like when you get those reports from those companies that are actually feeding your models for carbon data, for instance, or water needs and so forth, or pollution, how much do you trust this? Who has been validating this data? So I think the next level on with AI is to be able to audit all of this data and have transparency all across the board. I think this will be a super tool moving forward, and it should be unbiased, this auditability of the sustainability data. Yeah.
And for policies, and I'll make this a quick answer. We want policies that work. We want policies that work. By the way, they need to work for different things. So if I want to say, what do we need in order to cut deforestation in a certain region by X% by year, whatever, 2030, then we ask ourselves, okay, let's see what's out there already. So let's go and map the policies and map the policy instruments. Great, now we know what's out there. Does it work? Did any of those interventions work when we said you be the stewards of the forest, and you have the economic rights, and these are that's the planning regime, and this is these are the standards, and these are the subsidies and the taxes and the whatever, right? There's a lot of there's like a big policy menu of who's done what, when, and in interaction with what. But did it work? So let's go to the people who map satellites, like map deforestation with satellites, and start seeing, can we connect the dots? Similar to in the previous panel when we talked about health, I don't know, when you mandate masks, does COVID drop, right? So like, how do interventions map onto real world impacts? This is a big and complicated exercise, which is why until now we've only been doing it, not we, but like the world has been doing it anecdotally. Policy effectiveness assessments are a thorny, gnarly, messy, inaccurate thing. Can we inject it with a little more data? Again, with humility, not by pretending like the model will tell us what is needed, but can we use it to inform? And then can we ask, okay, laws are like, are there templates? So remember Microsoft Clippy? I see that you're writing a letter. How can I help? This is, some people in this room may remember that. I see that you're writing a policy. Have you considered gender aspect to this policy? Are some of those things that we can think about, those templated or like prompts? Have you remembered this? Have you considered that? Have you read that? People who bought this also bought that. So legislators who are legislating for transportation are also legislating for planning. And starting to bring those things together in a way that if you imagine the people who are doing it, I don't know, sitting at the Ministry of Environment in, pick a country that maybe only has 3 people in the Ministry of Environment and they have to do everything, and asking how can we help them make their, do it better. These are the things, these are the very practical tools that we can put in their hands, again, with all of the signaling, humility, and cautions around this not being perfect.
I'd see a hand. I don't know where the mic is.
Sorry, I have a question there.
Oh, sorry. Apologies.
Sorry, I didn't attend. I was a bit late, so I didn't attend the main presentation. But I don't know if you covered adverse weather events at all in your discussion. My question is about that anyway. So obviously we're all seeing floods and fires and all that happening everywhere all the time. And the WM, or the World Meteorological Organization, had a stat that really stood out for me, that in the 5 decades up to 2020, adverse weather events have grown by a factor of 5 in the world, and the cost of dealing with them has grown by a factor of 7 or even 8. So how does AI help us address the adverse weather events issue, but also how we address those adverse weather events to bring down the cost of addressing them?
Sure. I mean, let's not solve all of climate change in the next 2 minutes, but predictions. So the ability to reduce the damage from those, and that could be like early warning systems and planning, both in the long term. So I don't know, where do we need to put seawalls? Where do we need to move people? Because whatever we will do, hurricanes are going to hit and hit again and hit again and hit again and hit again. In the short, medium, long term. So there's a bunch of adaptation, and both short, medium, and long term that we need to consider. And the ability to have data that enables us, where do we need those interventions, and how do we predict if something is coming tomorrow, so we can bring the cows in so the cows don't get killed by the flood, or we can put our documents in the 2nd floor so our documents don't get some small, some big stuff there. That's the one thing, that those are the predictions. The other thing is, of course, anything that we can do to mitigate climate change and reduce and reverse the intensity, the frequency, and the adversity of those is critical. So in multiple ways, I think, is the answer. And that was a really non-comprehensive answer.
From a business perspective, it's already happening because of the CSRD framework again, thanks to regulation. Actually, you have to declare if your business is at climate risk. So if you have some production happening in Southeast Asia, where some of those hurricanes may happen more often in the next decades, then you have to report on those risks and you have to have a mitigation plan. So now this is where we're super happy to help our customers identify those using AI. So saying like, yeah, okay, we've mapped that in this region in particular, the intensity is going to be this and that. So we help filling that CSRD report, and then we sit with these people and we discuss, okay, what is possible, and develop a plan for the next 5 to 10 years, So it's actually happening already for businesses.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm Mark Kennedy from the Data Science Institute over at Imperial, and I've been lurking today. And as a comment, I just want to say I've really enjoyed all the panels, and it's been a pleasure to see, the kind of variety of things that the DSI here at LSE and the wider community are addressing. And this conversation here relates to work that we're starting to do now, which is inspired by using remote sensing data, IoT data, and then humans as sensor sort of data to say, how can we spot and solve problems that are solvable? I mean, we can't stop hurricanes, so that's not yet. That's not a thing that we're trying to figure out how to do that with data science. But there are lots of ways that this all comes together. And I think what's kind of cool about this is it relates back to the prior panels in the sense that for us to use information from people in a way that billions of people are carrying smart devices, and their bodies are also telling us things that they can't even say. We could use all of that, but it's major ethical issues, major challenges, legally and culturally. It involves all kinds of things that we have to do model-wise to be really smart about fixing that data, and then applying it to these kinds of problems. But that's where I see AI and data science is really coming together. Because when we start to think about how we can produce data to do those kinds of things, and how that then fuels the things that we can do that are positive with AI, as opposed to just selling you your next can of Pringles or whatever else it is, that starts to get really exciting. So I'm feeling that from the room today, and loving that feeling.
Thank you.
Thanks. There's another question here.
Thank you. Foley Ahaya from Strategic Agenda. First of all, I'm very happy that you mentioned, Michal, about the climate cost of AI. AI is rapacious when it comes to resources, energy, and water. There was a stat that someone once told me about Google opening up a data center in Uruguay, and it bought 72 acres of land. This was in 2023, and I think it's still going ahead despite a serious drought in Montevideo. 76 acres of land, which would take 7.6 million liters of water per day to cool its servers, enough to provide water for 55,000 people. So we all have to be cognizant that when we're asking ChatGPT to write an email or to do a complaint letter, that we are having an impact on the environment. And I think the big LLM producers need to show the cost and make it much clearer to the user. So I'm happy you raised that. Secondly, on the issue of the SDGs, I think it's a good question. I did my research back here in 2000, and my question was, it was just when the internet was burgeoning, and the UN was talking a lot of nonsense about being able to leapfrog, developing countries being able to leapfrog into the future because the internet was going to save everyone and make everyone happy and make everyone rich. So for me, AI is the shiny new thing that the UN is now talking about with its UN 2.0. What will fix or what will help us reach the SDGs is not AI. It's going to be government action. It's going to be serious. The elites deciding that they've got to gamble on development, as Stefan Durkheim has said. So that is a much more important thing to achieve rather than talking about the shiny new thing. Finally, I absolutely love AI. I am a tech optimist, but I struggle when I look at the data and I look at what is happening with AI and how it's being rolled out to find the positives for the planet. If we think about job losses, if we think about the wider issue of disincentivizing people to do certain careers because they now think that AI can do it better and will get better at doing something, there are so many negatives about this tool that I don't think people talk enough about it. So just as an open question to the panel, it would be great if you could tell me the top 3 positives you think that AI can bring to the world, and what makes you think that's going to happen.
I love this call for an uplifting closing note. Let's try our best.
Maybe you start, because you haven't talked so much while we're
Just
still
moderating.
thinking.
The easy seat. Yeah.
Now, I think first, thank you for your comments, because I think we haven't talked you have touched it a little bit about the water issue, and I think you're absolutely right. For me, this is the key point, because, yeah, in electricity, you can always try to like go for renewables or whatever, or place your data centers in cooler places, but water is always needed. So yeah, very good point. And I think some of those companies, cloud providers and everything are not transparent at all. I'm struggling. I have to report on my water consumption and I don't have all of the data. So thank you. Then yeah, I think for sure we've already discussed that. I think for decarbonization, AI can help a lot. It's already helping. So I don't see why this should not continue, which is good. But it's not sufficient. I think the next big one will be on biodiversity preservation and regeneration. I think we can identify better and better the places where we can do that, thanks to AI. How will the species develop? What are the competition between the species and whatnot? So I think this is coming up. We're already working on a few cases actually. I'd love to have a good social example where AI could help, but nothing is coming out of my mind right now. But I'll keep thinking, because I'm sure there are plenty. And when you talk about job losses, maybe there will be some nice AI applications to actually anticipate where those people should maybe be trained into like new fields. You talked about the coal miners, but I don't have an example, so that's just top of my mind. But I'll keep thinking. Maybe you take over.
Sorry, can I just pick you up on that point?
Yeah.
So my issue is you mentioned, Michal, you mentioned augmented intelligence, which I think is fantastic. But I really get the sense that we're looking at at AI as something that we can outsource our thinking to, and it'll solve our problems.
So let me answer your...
It'll help with policies. Great, you can now use Policy Radar to get all the policies, but how will it make a difference by collecting all the policies and having a chatbot that I can now interrogate to help me answer questions?
So let me answer from a practical question, from a practical point of view, and let me then answer from a philosophical point of view, along with your challenge for three uplifting or promising ways. The very pragmatic thing is it's a tool. It's a tool that replaces some tasks that are Sisyphic, like reading lots of documents, right? Your average civil servant who's writing an options paper that is due on his boss's desk by tomorrow, because she said to him that, tell me what the 6 top economies are doing on this. Instead of that civil servant sitting and reading and control finding and yellow highlighting, they can do that faster, which means they can put their expertise to a better use. And I'll tie that to the jobs thing. I'll summarize it in, it's unlikely that your job will be taken by AI. Your job will be taken by someone who understands AI or who works with AI. There's a transformation here, and this to me is an interesting point in time where we can say jobs, some jobs will be lost. Yes, other jobs will be created. And by the way, if we really want to go like aspirational and ambitious, then the way our society is constructed will also change. Hopefully we will not have to work crazy hours 6 days a week like we used to, and then 5 days a week, and the transformation to a 4-day work week is happening. Happy to say that Climate Policy Radar is already championing it, because we are able to do things differently, because we shouldn't have to slave for food and for our basic needs and for shelter and for community and for entertainment and for all of those things. We should be able to get them much more efficiently and sustainably through sociological, technological, and spiritual changes in how we think. So somebody will not have a job is, to me, no disrespect. This is not a particular thing. I wanted to say it's a lazy answer, because I think we need to think how will we change it rather than saying we won't have them. So I would like to invite us into that transformational thinking, and I'll end on that, because I think, to me, one of the incredible things about AI, including the challenges of it, is that it forces us into the conversation about the hard things. First of all, into what's human. If you follow the conversation about AI and the arts, and is a poem that's written by AI, is that satisfying as much as a poem written by a suffering human? It forces us into those distinctions about decision making. Who's the one making the decisions, and what does it mean to make a human decision? And so I think it really, really has floated complex conversations that we really should be having, and I hope we have them well. So that will be what I end on.
That's a great place to end on. Thank you so much, and a great starting point for our conversation, the refreshment. Thank you so much for being a great audience.